I need you to stay with me for this one, because this is not the kind of story that lets you go. Christmas Eve, 1993, a little house in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and inside that house everything is exactly the way Christmas Eve is supposed to feel. Cinnamon, pine needles, colored lights blinking on the tree, a little girl in red pajamas who still believes with her whole chest that magic is real. She has been working on something all week, a card for her daddy, her best markers. Glitter she pressed in with her small fingers, and 4 words on the inside written as carefully as she could manage because she needed him to know she meant every single one. To Daddy, my hero. He read it, he kissed her forehead. He told her he loved her more than anything, and then he said he needed to step out for just a little while. He would be back before she even fell asleep. She watched him walk down the hallway. She heard the front door open. She heard it close. And that was the last time Lily Carter ever saw her father. The police had a theory. The neighbors had a theory. The whole town of Clarksburg had a theory. And for 30 years every single one of them believed they were right. They were not. And the proof that broke this case open 30 years later was sitting in a locked metal box in an attic that nobody had touched since 1993. Tonight I am going to show you what was inside it. But first I need you to understand something about that little girl, because she never stopped. Not once, not for 30 years. Every single Christmas Eve she walked to that fireplace and left one cookie on a plate, one cookie just in case. That is the kind of belief that moves mountains, and in this case it moved the truth. Now I have to tell you something, and I need you to really sit with this. There was a man, a perfectly ordinary decent man, who saw Daniel Carter on the side of Millbrook Road the very night he disappeared. Saw him clear as anything. Recognized his truck, recognized his face, saw him standing there in the cold dark with a teenage boy who looked absolutely terrified. This man went home, had his Christmas Eve dinner, and then 3 days later when the whole town was talking about Daniel Carter being missing, he picked up the phone and he called the police. He told them everything. He gave them his name, he gave them his number, he said, "Call me back, I will tell you exactly what I saw," and they never called him back, not once, not ever. He waited 30 years for a phone call that never came. Now, I want you to think about what that means. This is not a story about a man who abandoned his family. That is the easy story. That is the story the town told itself so it could sleep at night. What we are actually dealing with here is something far more complicated, far more heartbreaking, and when you finally hear the whole truth, something that is going to make you think very differently about what love looks like when it has no other choice. We are going to take this story apart piece by piece tonight. We are going to go back to that Christmas Eve and walk through every single hour. We are going to meet the people who were left behind and learn what 30 years of not knowing does to a family. And we are going to end up in a small mountain town sitting across from a man who kept a secret for 3 decades, a secret that Daniel Carter trusted him with on the coldest night of the year. Before we go any deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. We would love to hear from you. And if you are not already subscribed, please hit that button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because I promise you, the story of Daniel Carter is one you are not going to forget, and we are just getting started. December 24th, 1993. The Carter house on Birchwood Lane woke up the way it always did on a big day. Sarah first, before the light, already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead. She had a grocery list on the counter and a pie that needed finishing and a strand of Christmas lights that had stopped working on one end sometime in the night. Daniel fixed the lights before the kids came downstairs. He did not make a big deal of it. He just sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and worked through the strand bulb by bulb until he found the bad one, replaced it and plugged the whole thing back in. That is the kind of man he was. He did not announce things, he just fixed them. By mid-morning the house smelled like cinnamon and warm sugar and pine from the tree in the corner of the living room. Lily had taken over the entire kitchen table with her cookie decorating and was applying green sprinkles with the focus of a surgeon. Ben had retreated to his room the way 12-year-old boys do when the house gets too festive, reappearing every 30 minutes to steal cookie dough and disappear again before Lily noticed. Sarah's sister Ruth came by in the early afternoon with a pie and stayed for 2 hours. She would later tell investigators that Daniel seemed completely himself that day, not anxious, not distracted, not like a man who already knew what the night was going to ask of him, just Daniel. Steady and quiet and present the way he always was. And that is the thing that made what happened next so impossible for this family to accept, because nothing about that day looked like a goodbye, not one single thing. By late afternoon the house had settled into that particular Christmas Eve calm, the cooking done, the wrapping almost finished, the children starting to feel the pull of the evening ahead. Daniel had spent an hour in the garage after Ruth left, and when he came back inside he smelled like cold air and engine grease, which was just the smell of him, the smell Lily had known her whole life. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He helped Sarah set the table. And then the 5 of them, Daniel, Sarah, Ben, Lily, and the whole warm, ordinary weight of their life together sat down for Christmas Eve dinner. Leftover glazed ham, biscuits, sweet potato casserole, which was Lily's absolute favorite thing in the world and she would tell you so without being asked. Daniel made her eat 2 bites of green beans before she was excused and she made the face she always made and he laughed. And Sarah said Daniel stop encouraging her and he laughed again. These are the moments. You know what I mean when I say that. These are the moments that the people who love someone replay over and over after that person is gone. The ordinary, unremarkable, completely irreplaceable moments that nobody ever thinks to memorize while they are still happening. After dinner he helped clear the table. He got Lily into her red pajamas, the new ones she had specifically wanted to wear on Christmas Eve because she was convinced Santa would appreciate the effort. He read to her while she brushed her teeth in between sentences the way children do when they are trying to slow time down without admitting it. He kissed her forehead, she gave him the card. He told her it was the best card he had ever received in his life. He put her to bed, he placed the card on the nightstand, and then he went back downstairs, and the phone rang. At approximately 9:15 in the evening the phone rang. Sarah was in the living room watching the news. Daniel answered in the kitchen. She heard his voice change, not dramatically, not in the way that would have made her stand up. Just a subtle shift in register, the kind of shift that you only notice later when you are replaying every moment looking for the thing you missed. He came back into the living room and told her he needed to go take care of something. A friend needed help. He said he would not be long. He told her not to wait up. He put on his coat and his work boots and he kissed her on the temple the way he always did when he left a room. He told her he loved her. She said she loved him too. She did not look up from the television because there was no reason to. And that was the last time Sarah Carter ever saw her husband. The truck was found the following morning at 7:14 a.m. by a neighbor who was leaving early for his sister's house 2 counties over. It was sitting at the side of Millbrook Road, 3 miles from the Carter house, engine cold. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition, wallet on the seat, a half-drunk cup of coffee in the cup holder, a paper cup from the gas station on Route 19, which meant Daniel had stopped somewhere between leaving the house and whatever happened next. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints in the frozen ground that told any useful story, no witnesses, nothing except the silence of an empty truck on a cold December morning with Christmas lights blinking in the windows of every house down the road. The official investigation lasted 11 days. 11 days. A husband and father of 2 children vanished on Christmas Eve, and the official investigation lasted 11 days before the lead detective, a man named Sheriff Roy Adkins, who had held his position for 19 years and was 11 months away from retirement, concluded that Daniel Carter had left voluntarily. No crime had been committed, he determined. A man had chosen to walk away from his family. It happened, he told Sarah, more often than people wanted to believe. He said it the way people say things when they have already decided and are simply delivering the conclusion. He did not say it with cruelty, but he said it with finality, and that finality became the story that Clarksburg told itself about Daniel Carter for the next 30 years. The whispers started within weeks. Sarah heard them at the grocery store, felt them in the way conversations shifted when she walked into a room, in the way certain women who had been her friends for years suddenly became less available. The story that the town settled on was not complicated. Daniel Carter had gotten tired of his responsibilities, or found someone else, or simply decided that the life he had built was not the life he wanted. Men did that. It was not unheard of. And because there was no evidence pointing anywhere else, the story held. It held the way a lie holds when there is no one powerful enough to challenge it. Ben turned 13 that following February and never spoke about his father in public again. He developed the particular hardness that comes to boys who feel abandoned and do not have the language yet to name what they are feeling. He became protective of his mother to the point of being fierce about it. He worked after school from the time he was 14, helped with bills by the time he was 16, and graduated high school early so he could take on more hours at the lumber yard. He was angry in the deep cold way that does not burn out easily. When people brought up Daniel Carter in front of him, his jaw would set and his eyes would go somewhere far away, and he would change the subject or leave the room. He did not leave a cookie by the fireplace. He did not speak his father's name. He would not for many years allow himself to grieve someone he had decided it was safer to resent. Sarah did what women of her generation and her particular kind of character do. She kept going. She held the mortgage together by taking work as a bookkeeper for 3 different small businesses simultaneously. She made sure the children were fed and clothed and that Christmas happened every year, not lavish, never lavish but real. There were always presents under the tree and cookies in the kitchen and the same strand of lights that Daniel had fixed that last morning. She kept those lights. She put them up every year. She was not a woman who performed grief. She carried it quietly like something in her coat pocket, always there, never announced. She filed the missing persons report herself when Sheriff Adkins closed the investigation. She filed it with the state police who noted it, filed it and did nothing further with it. She wrote 2 letters to the FBI field office in Charleston. They were acknowledged and not followed up on. She did not stop believing something had happened to Daniel. She simply ran out of avenues. And life, relentless, demanding, indifferent life, kept coming. And then there was Lily. Lily, who was 8 years old and had been wearing red pajamas and had believed her father when he said he would be back before she fell asleep. Lily did not go through the stages of grief in any recognizable order. She moved directly from confusion to certainty, not the certainty that her father was dead but the certainty that he had not left. She could not have explained it at 8 years old. She could not have explained it at 18, but she knew her father. She knew the way he looked at her. She knew that a man who fixed Christmas lights before breakfast and kept a cracked blue mug because it still held coffee and kissed his daughter's forehead and called her his best girl was not a man who drove away and never looked back. She knew it the way you know certain things that cannot be proven in the bones in the gut, in the place where love and logic meet and decide together. Every year on Christmas Eve, she left one cookie by the fireplace, not in a childlike, magical thinking kind of way. In a deliberate, intentional, I have not given up kind of way. When she was 12 it was a sugar cookie with green sprinkles. When she was 22 it was store-bought because she had been working double shifts at the diner and had not had time to bake. When she was 38 it was the same sugar cookie recipe her mother had used, rolled out on the same counter in the same kitchen in the house she had moved back into when Sarah's health began to decline. Every year, for 30 years, one cookie. One act of faith so quiet it would break your heart if you knew about it. And we are going to get to the moment when that faith was answered. But first, we need to talk about what Lily found in the attic the spring her mother died. Sarah Carter died on a Tuesday in April 2023, in the same house she and Daniel had moved into together in 1982. She was 68 years old. The cause was congestive heart failure, which her doctor had been managing for 4 years and which had been slowly winning that particular argument. She died in the morning, which was the time of day she had always preferred, early light, coffee already made, the birds just starting up outside. Lily was with her. Ben drove through the night from Pittsburgh when the call came and arrived 3 hours after she was gone, and stood in the kitchen for a long time not touching his coffee. They did not have a lot of time with their grief before the practical demands of death arrived, because that is how it works. There are arrangements and paperwork and the particular exhausted logistics of ending a life, and it does not wait for you to be ready. 3 weeks after Sarah's funeral, Lily went up to the attic to begin sorting through the 40 years of accumulated living that needed to be addressed before the house could be sold, and that is where she found the metal box. It was a small gray lockbox, the kind you can buy at any hardware store, the kind people use for documents or small amounts of cash. It was not hidden exactly. It was pushed to the back of a shelf behind a row of Christmas ornament boxes and a plastic bin of winter coats that had not been touched in a decade. Lily almost missed it entirely, but her hand caught the edge of it when she was pulling down the ornament boxes and she felt the weight of it, heavier than it looked, and she set it on the floor and sat down beside it and looked at it for a long time. The lock was small and silver and showed no signs of rust. Someone had opened this box recently. Or maintained it, or both. Inside the box, when Lily eventually got a locksmith to open it the following morning because she did not have the key and she had looked everywhere, she found 3 things. The first was a small leather notebook with her father's initials stamped on the cover. DWC Daniel Wayne Carter. She recognized the notebook immediately. She had seen it on his desk in the shop when she was a child. He used to write things in it, parts orders, customer names, measurements, the kind of running notes a working man keeps. The second thing was a folded map, a road map, the paper kind, the kind everyone used before GPS existed. It was a map of West Virginia and the western edge of Virginia, and there was a route marked on it in blue pen, running from Clarksburg southeast through the mountains, ending at a circle drawn around a small town called Harmon. The third thing was an envelope. White, unsealed, addressed in handwriting she would have known anywhere, her father's block print, careful and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had taught himself to write neatly because he had not been taught well enough as a child. The envelope was addressed to her, to Lily, and underneath her name in that same careful print, only if I never come home. She sat on the attic floor with that envelope in her hands and she did not open it for 4 hours. She just sat there. Because some things, once you open them, you cannot go back from, and she had been holding on to the version of this story where her father was still coming home for 30 years. She was not ready to let go of it without preparing herself first. When she finally opened the envelope, she found nothing. The envelope was empty. Whatever her father had written to her, whatever he had needed her to know if the worst happened, was gone. And the question of who had taken it, and when, and why, would become the engine of everything that came next. Lily Carter, Lily Morrison now, she had been briefly married in her early 30s and kept the name because her children carried it, was not a detective. She taught 4th grade at Clarksburg Elementary, which was the same school she had attended as a child, which she had always found both meaningful and slightly funny. She was 58 years old, 5'4", with her mother's dark eyes and what remained of her father's easy grin, and she had a particular quality that her students recognized and her friends relied on, a kind of calm persistence. The kind that is not dramatic. The kind that simply does not stop. She called Ben the night she found the empty envelope. She told him about the box, the notebook, the map, the envelope that had been emptied of whatever it had once contained. Ben was quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone. Then he said, "Who had access to the attic?" It was not a question. It was the beginning of a different kind of thinking, the kind you do when you are no longer willing to accept the story you were given. Lily began the way anyone begins when they decide to dig up the past, slowly, methodically, starting with the official record. She requested the original missing persons file from the Clarksburg Police Department through a public records request. What she received 3 weeks later was 22 pages. 22 pages for the disappearance of a husband and father on Christmas Eve, investigated over 11 days and then closed. She read those 22 pages 4 times, and then she made a list of everything that was not in them. Daniel's phone records from the night of December 24th were not in the file. Not because they had been checked and found unremarkable, there was no notation indicating they had been checked at all. The phone call that brought Daniel out of his house that night, the call that Sarah heard him answer in the kitchen, there was no record of any attempt to trace it. The abandoned truck had been processed for fingerprints, but the results were logged in a single line. No prints of value recovered. No follow-up was noted. No record of canvassing the neighborhood along Millbrook Road, the route between the Carter house and where the truck was found. And perhaps most striking to Lily, most glaring in its absence, no record of any interview with a man named Curtis Webb. She found Curtis Webb's name in the notebook. Her father had written it twice, once with a phone number that no longer existed and once with the notation underlined. Only one who saw 3 words, underlined, a man who had seen something. And he had never been interviewed. She found Curtis Webb the way people find lost things now, through the patient, unglamorous work of online searches and county records, and a retired police dispatcher in Braxton County named Evelyn who had worked the county lines for 31 years and remembered, she said, almost everything. Curtis Webb was 79 years old. He lived in a small house in Sutton, West Virginia, 40 miles southeast of Clarksburg. He was a retired mail carrier. He had driven rural routes in Harrison County for 26 years. And when Lily called him on a Wednesday evening in June 2023 and told him who she was and asked him if he remembered Christmas Eve of 1993, he was quiet for so long that she thought the call had dropped. And then he said, "I wondered when somebody was finally going to call me about that." Curtis Webb had been driving his personal car home on the evening of December 24, 1993. He lived off Millbrook Road and always took the same route. At approximately 9:50 that evening, he remembered the time because his car clock had the kind of digital display that stuck in your mind and he had glanced at it specifically. He passed a truck pulled to the side of the road. He recognized it as Daniel Carter's truck. He had dropped mail at Carter's shop for years and knew the vehicle. He slowed down. He saw Daniel standing outside the truck and he was not alone. He was talking to a boy, Curtis's word, a boy, though he acknowledged the person could have been a young man, 17 or 18 at most, hard to tell in the dark. The boy looked frightened, Curtis said. That was the word he used, and he used it carefully, the way a man uses a word he has been holding onto for 30 years. Frightened, not aggressive. Not threatening, frightened, like someone who needed help. Curtis had slowed nearly to a stop. Daniel had seen him and lifted a hand, not in a wave, more in a gesture that Curtis interpreted as, "I've got this. I'm fine. Keep going." So he kept going. He drove home. He told his wife what he had seen, and she said it was probably someone with car trouble, and he agreed, and they had their Christmas Eve dinner, and he did not think much more about it until 3 days later when he heard that Daniel Carter was missing. He called the police. He spoke to a deputy who told him to hold and then came back and took his name and phone number and told him someone would follow up with him. Nobody ever did. Nobody called Curtis Webb back. Nobody came to his house. Nobody asked him what the boy looked like or which direction Daniel and the boy had been facing or whether there had been another vehicle nearby. Nobody asked him anything. And Curtis Webb, a quiet, decent man who trusted that the authorities knew what they were doing, waited for a call that never came, and 30 years passed. What Lily learned next did not come from a single source. It came the way real truth usually comes, in fragments from different directions over a period of months, each piece connecting to the next like something assembling itself slowly in the dark. She found the Harmon connection through the map. The town of Harmon, West Virginia, is a small, isolated community in the Allegheny Highlands, the kind of place that barely appears on maps, with a population that has never exceeded a few hundred people, and a particular quality of removal from the rest of the state that is partly geographic and partly by choice. Lily drove there on a Saturday in July with the road map from her father's metal box folded on the passenger seat beside her. She did not know what she was looking for. She only knew that her father had circled it in blue pen for a reason. She found it by asking questions in the only diner in town, a 4-table place called Patsy's that smelled like coffee and frying oil, and had a wall calendar from 2019 still hanging above the cash register. The woman behind the counter was approximately 70 years old, and had the particular stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime deciding what to say and what not to say. When Lily explained who she was and what she was looking for, the woman, her name was Gloria, wiped the counter for a long time without speaking. And then she said, "You'd want to talk to Marcus." Marcus Tilley was 61 years old. He had lived in Harmon his entire life except for 4 years that he never discussed in specific terms. He had a small property on the edge of town, 2 acres, a workshop, a vegetable garden that he tended with the focused attention of a man who has learned to find peace in small, contained things. He was quiet and self-contained, and when Lily knocked on his door that Saturday afternoon and told him she was Daniel Carter's daughter, something moved across his face, not surprise, relief. The specific, exhausted relief of a man who has been carrying a secret for 30 years and had begun to wonder whether he would carry it to his grave. Marcus Tilley had been 17 years old on Christmas Eve of 1993. He had grown up in a house on the outskirts of Clarksburg, a difficult house, he said without elaborating, and Lily did not press him on it. He had been running that night. Running from something he had seen earlier in the evening, something that had put him in the path of people he knew were dangerous, people with reach and connection and the specific confidence of men who have never been held accountable for anything. He would not name those people even now, 30 years later. He said only that they were not small time, and that what he had witnessed, he described it as a conversation that had turned violent, between men whose names appeared in local government and local business, was the kind of thing that people who saw it did not survive if the wrong person found out what they had seen. He had been running down Millbrook Road in the dark on Christmas Eve, 17 years old and terrified, when Daniel Carter's truck had pulled up beside him. Daniel had not known Marcus before that night. He had simply seen a frightened boy running along a dark road on Christmas Eve and pulled over. That was the kind of man Daniel Carter was. He pulled over because a boy was running and frightened, and it was Christmas Eve and you did not drive past that. Marcus told him what he had seen. And Daniel Carter, who was not a powerful man, who did not have connections or influence or any weapon beyond his own character, made a decision in that truck on that dark road that would cost him everything he loved. He believed Marcus, and he understood with the particular clarity of a man who has spent his life reading situations correctly, that if Marcus went home that night, he might not be alive by morning. Daniel drove Marcus out of Clarksburg that night. He drove the route marked on that blue pen map. He drove southeast through the mountains toward Harmon, toward a place Marcus had mentioned, a relative, a great uncle he barely knew, someone who lived far enough away from Clarksburg that it might be far enough. He got Marcus there safely, and then he faced the decision that would define the rest of his life. He could go home. He could go home to Sarah and Lily and Ben, and he could try to pretend this night had not happened. But the men Marcus had seen were capable of tracing a loose end, and a loose end in this case was a 17-year-old boy who could identify them. If Daniel went home, he went home as the man who could place that boy who had been seen on Millbrook Road with him by at least one person who might be made to talk. Going home meant the danger followed him. Going home meant it followed Sarah. It meant it followed an 8-year-old girl in red pajamas who had handed him a Christmas card that evening with glitter glue still wet on the edges. He could not risk it. That is what Marcus told Lily, sitting at his kitchen table in Harmon on a Saturday afternoon in July 2023, with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold while he talked. Daniel Carter had made a phone call before he left Harmon that night. He had called someone Marcus did not know who, had never known who, and made an arrangement. And then he had disappeared, not because he wanted to leave, because leaving was the only way to keep his family safe. He had spent 30 years keeping that promise from a distance. Marcus Tilley handed Lily a journal before she left Harmon that afternoon. It was a brown leather journal, softened with age, the kind with a strap that wraps around the cover and snaps shut. He had received it 5 years earlier, delivered to his door without a return address, along with a short handwritten note that said only, "Give this to Lily Carter when the time is right." He had been waiting for the right time ever since. He had been waiting for someone to come looking. He handed it to her and went back inside his house without another word. Lily sat in her car in Marcus Tilley's driveway for 45 minutes before she could open it. She called Ben. She told him where she was and what she was holding, and he did not say anything for a long time, and then he said, "Come home," and then he said, "No, open it now, I want to know." The journal contained 30 years of entries. Not daily, sometimes weeks would pass between them, but every Christmas. Every single Christmas without exception for 30 years. The entries were not long, they were not dramatic. They were the specific, private entries of a man who was not writing for an audience, who was writing because it was the only way he had left to be a father. He wrote about watching Lily's high school graduation from a distance. He did not say how he managed it, only that he had been there in the back, and that she had walked across that stage with her mother's composure and her own particular light, and that he had not been able to breathe for the entire length of the ceremony. He wrote about the February day in 2004 when Ben's daughter was born. Lily had posted an announcement in the local paper, the kind people still did then, and how Daniel had read it 3 times at a table in a diner somewhere he did not name, and how he had ordered a slice of pie he did not eat because he could not stop reading those 3 sentences. He wrote about missing the smell of the house on Sunday mornings. He wrote about the blue mug with the cracked handle that he had thought about leaving behind on purpose, because Sarah would know he had not planned to leave if the mug was still there, and then he had realized it would not matter, the mug would not tell her enough. He wrote about Lily's cookie. He knew about the cookie. He had found out somehow, in the way that a man who is watching his family from the outside eventually pieces things together, and he had written about it every Christmas for 30 years. One entry, Christmas 1999, Lily would have been 14, said only this: "She still leaves the cookie. I do not deserve that, but I am grateful for it in a way I will never be able to explain to anyone alive." The final entry in the journal was dated December 24, 2022. 1 year before Sarah died, 1 year before Lily found the metal box. It was longer than the others. Daniel wrote that he was old and that he was tired in the way that a man gets tired when the weight he has been carrying has been on his shoulders for too long and his body has started to object. He wrote that he had been sick. He did not specify, but the language suggested something serious, something that had made him rethink what he had always told himself about why he could not come back. He wrote that he was not sure anymore that the danger was still real, or whether he had simply grown so accustomed to carrying it that he had forgotten to ask whether it was still there. He wrote, "I have been wrong about many things. I do not think I was wrong about that night, but I may have been wrong about how long it had to last." He wrote about Sarah. He wrote about her in the way a man writes about someone he has loved for 50 years even though he only got to be beside her for 14 of them. And he wrote at the very end of the entry in the same careful block print that Lily had known her whole life, "I hope she knows. I hope both of them know. I never left. Not the part of me that counts. That part of me has been home the whole time." Lily read that entry 3 times in her car in Marcus Tilley's driveway while the July light changed around her. And she did not try to stop herself from crying. She had been trying to stop herself from crying about her father for 30 years. She decided that she had earned the right to let it happen. Daniel Carter had died in March 2023, 1 month before Sarah. They had outlived each other by a single month, which was either the cruelest thing or the most fitting thing depending on how you held it. He had died in a town called Elkins, West Virginia, not far from where he had driven Marcus Tilley that Christmas Eve. He had lived quietly under a name that he had built a small and careful life inside of, and he had died in a way that left no drama and no public record and no announcement in any paper. But he had left the journal, and he had left the metal box, and he had left the map, and he had arranged through channels that Lily is still piecing together for anonymous deposits to appear in Sarah's bank account at irregular intervals for 20 years, not large amounts, enough to help. Enough to matter, enough for a mortgage payment in a hard month or a car repair or a school field trip for Lily when they were particularly stretched. Sarah had never been able to explain those deposits to her own satisfaction. She had assumed it was some insurance policy she had forgotten about, or a distant family member. She had asked and not received answers and eventually stopped asking and simply been grateful. On a Sunday in October 2023, Lily Carter Morrison drove to a small cemetery outside of Elkins and stood at her father's grave for the first time. She brought a sugar cookie. She placed it at the base of the headstone. She stood there in the October wind with her hands in her pockets and her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn, unshakable love for the people who belonged to her. And she spoke to him the way you speak to the dead when you have found out that they loved you correctly the whole time, even when you could not see it. She said, "You kept your promise. You came home, just differently than I expected." Ben drove down from Pittsburgh 2 weeks later and stood at the same grave and did not say anything for a long time. And then he said his father's name, just once. It was enough. There is a version of this story where Daniel Carter made the wrong choice, where he should have come home, should have faced the danger instead of disappearing into it, should have trusted that his family could handle whatever came with the truth. That version is not wrong. There are people who love this family who believe it. Sarah believed it, some days more than others, in the particular complicated way of a woman who loved a man she had lost and never fully understood. But there is another version. The version where a man on a dark road on Christmas Eve looked at a frightened boy and made a choice from the deepest part of his character, the part built by a mother who sang in the church choir, and a father with coal dust in his knuckles, and 40 years of quietly doing what needed to be done regardless of what it cost. The version where love is not always warm and visible and present at the table. Sometimes love is the long, cold, invisible thing that keeps working in the dark, that fixes the lights before breakfast, that leaves the cracked mug in the cabinet because it still holds coffee just fine, that watches from a distance for 30 years and writes it all down so that one day, when the time is right, the people who needed to know will know. Lily Carter Morrison left a cookie by her fireplace on Christmas Eve this past December. She always will. Some traditions, once they mean something that large, do not end. They just change what they are celebrating. And if you have been watching this tonight and there is someone in your life you have not called, someone you have been carrying a story about that you are not sure is the right story, maybe this is the night to pick up the phone. Maybe some of the people we have decided to give up on have been watching from a distance, loving us in ways we cannot see. Maybe not, but maybe. That is the question we are leaving you with tonight, and we think it is worth sitting with. Before we go, what do you think about the choice Daniel made? Was it the right one? Was it a sacrifice, or was it something else? We want to know what you think in the comments below. And if you have been with us tonight from the very beginning of this story, thank you, truly. We know you could spend your time anywhere, and you chose to spend it here with this family and this story that deserved to be told. If this moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And do not forget, subscribe to the Tales of Human Shadow so you don't miss any of our videos. This is the tailies of human shadow. Every shadow has tail, this is where they live.